Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week I'm going to get into my top 5 films of Sundance 2022.
Alright, let's dive on in.
Sundance!
Alright everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher.
And if you like what you see/hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what?
Find good media.
That's right, you know the drill.
I do know the drill. Yes, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube so you get notified every time we post a new episode. We do these weekly, sometimes multiple times a week if we can do it, depending on our schedules. But we have festivals, we have punishment reviews, we have recasting. We actually have only done one recasting. We need to do that again.
Forgotten Gems.
Forgotten Gems. All sorts of stuff. Our festivals that definitely want to play along with us. And then, luckily this, because of this podcast, we've been doing it over 14 years now. I've been able to go to Sundance as a member of the media. For those who have listened a long time, I try and do this every year.
Big quotation marks around.
Well, you put quotation marks around it and say it's my Vandalay Industries, but
it is.
You would hire me to be your latex salesman. Come on,
you can be my latex salesman. Yes.
14 years. You got to give me a little credit after this time.
I will.
I've watched hundreds of movies. It's no longer.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like when you walk through in my head. Because I've only been with you for one of these, and I got to meet Mr. Werner Herzog, so I thank you for that.
Yeah.
But in my head, you have an old fedora with the piece of paper in it that says press on it. And you're like, press coming through, see?
Hey, see?
And I'm like, nobody knows he's doing it in my house. Like, they think he's like an official, whatever. Anyway.
Mr. Malkovich, what made you take this role?
Yeah, that's exactly it. With an old-timey microphone. Yeah.
He's like, who are you? That would make me stand out way more than any other person in the press.
Fuck,
but
that would be amazing.
I know you like to give me crap about it. So.
If you had like an old school, like My Girl Friday style voice, fuck, that would be incredible. Anyway, sorry. So yes. It allows you to go to Sundance.
Yeah, so I go every year, see 20 plus movies generally. These past 2 years, obviously, because of the pandemic, have been virtual. And so it's not quite the experience. I can't wait for it to get back to in person. They also have less movies submitted the past couple of years. Maybe it's because of just, they're trying to do everything virtually. It's all online. I was at least able to watch it on like my Roku this year. So there's been some advancements, and it's been a pretty flawless online experience. But again, watching a recording of a Q&A is just not quite the same as being there in the
For sure.
Atmosphere and seeing it with people and everything like that. So I didn't even count this year, but it was over 20 movies. And the nice thing about doing it virtually is that I can bust them out. I'm not driving, trekking through the snow, catching buses, getting late to theaters and stuff like that. I'm able to just... Honestly, I feel kind of like a worthless piece of shit because I'm just sitting there watching movies for 5 straight days on my couch or my bed.
And telling your family, like, Daddy's watching movies.
Hey, I'm working right now, okay?
I can't walk the dog. I can't take the garbage out. Daddy's watching movies.
Yes. Bring me some food. All right. So I got 5. I'm not going to... Usually I kind of pant through all of them. I'm just going to do top 5 this year. I'll let you pick. I can start with 1 or 5. What do you think? Should I start at 5 or 1?
So 5 being not least favorite, but number 1 is top. That's the brass ring.
Yeah.
Let's start with 5. Let's start with 5 then.
You'll appreciate this one. It's the only doc on my list this year. Docs are pretty interesting. They're a dime a dozen these days, right? I feel like they're everywhere, especially with streaming. And Sundance is no stranger to the documentary. It's a big reason why they're so big, honestly, I think. So it's fun to kind of see what they come out with. A lot of stuff seems like it's already purchased. and stuff like this. But this one hit me. This is purely personal choice. But this one hit me right in the indie rock soul of my heart. Based on a book by Lizzie Goodman on the New York City indie rock scene, and it's called Meet Me in the Bathroom. The documentary is purely archival footage. So they're pulling from interviews, they're pulling from MTV, whatever it may be. But it's really based around end of 90s, early 2000s indie rock. Right, where
whoa,
where
who? What are we talking about?
Yeah. So, not necessarily a ton of bands that I'm like crazy into, but just putting me back in this atmosphere. We have friends who were in some pretty major bands, at least from our scene here locally, but they played in New York City. We were there in New York City with them at times. But the book, they mainly talk about kind of the beginning of the Strokes and how they became kind of the next big wave of bands.
Okay.
And then stuff like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Karen O, Interpol, LCD Sound System, bands like that were from New York that were breaking out in the scene. Strokes is probably my favorite of those. I really enjoy the Strokes. Yeah, Yeahs is okay, and Karen O is definitely a wild front person for a band, and definitely has some great stuff as well. Same with Interpol. Interpol kind of was riding the coattails of the Strokes a little more than anything.
Totally.
But what really threw me back was archival footage, not only the show footage, but it's really forcing you to be in the scene, right? And you're seeing kind of the rise, and I don't want to say fall because none of these bands are like necessarily fell off a huge cliff or anything like that. But when you're at your peak, and I remember when we worked at record stores, and you couldn't keep a Strokes or the Hives CD record in there. Like
I was gonna say, I remember reading an article. God, I want to say it was only 3 or 4 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, in maybe Spin magazine, that was about how that was about the Strokes, and it was about how the singer of the Strokes,
Julian,
I might be misremembering this, but that his friendship and subsequent drug addiction because of his friendship with Ryan Adams is part of the reason why the Strokes never became what they could have been.
Yes. So it wasn't the singer; it was actually the guitar player that you're referencing.
Okay.
And they do get into some of the Ryan Adams stuff and how he got him hooked onto drugs and.
So I
and
think
all
that's
that
really
stuff.
interesting, though, is this idea of like the Strokes like had this moment of being like, "Holy shit, is this the next thing?" And then if you think
sure.
about it, after
It was for a little while.
Well, after Room on Fire, right, their second record, it was like, okay, open the floodgates, here they come. And then they didn't do anything. And a lot of it had to do with his drug addiction. And it's like they missed the boat on being as huge as they could have been. Isn't it weird sometimes to think back about that time period? And maybe this is just me being an old fogey, where I'm like, something about literally something about the numbers of the year 2000 and all the years subsequent after it makes 2005 still not seem like that long ago to me, where I'm like 2005 and then I'm like 17 years ago. And it's like hard for me to like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, completely. Well, watching this through archival footage, really puts you in there. And there's another documentary at the festival called The Princess, based around Princess Diana, but it was purely archival footage, and her whole life was based around the press when she started dating Prince Charles.
Yeah.
Right? And so we get the Beatles mania version of like this, and also
paparazzi.
It forces you to be like, hey, you really just feel bad for her in the end. But it really puts you in that perspective, in that world, and that's what this one did here. And the thing that really blew me away here is this is the era. This is before 9/11 and after 9/11. It's the era.
Right.
It's the era of iPods. It's the era of MySpace and Napster and all of this stuff, AOL, and all of that just had to be rushing back, going, "Oh my god, I forgot about how cool the iPod was when it first came out." Right?
Here's the question for you, Adam. Do they reference makeoutclub.com?
I don't think so. I think that was a regional
But
thing.
holy shit.
but like that era of like just getting into the internet for us, half of our lives, most of our lives at that point hadn't really been around the internet, right?
Dude, you were the only person I knew that owned a computer. And we lived in a warehouse together. God, this sounds like it was 2 million years ago.
It's true.
And it kind of was. But we lived in a warehouse together, you and I did, in separate parts of a warehouse, and you were the only person I knew that had a computer. And when 9/11 happened, this is, obviously pre-YouTube, and so like video footage that you could watch online was so sketchy, and it took so long to buffer.
Grainy, whatever. Yeah.
And it was just all super pixelated, but it was like, that's how we were getting all of our information, was sitting in front of your computer like, like trying to like click, and then you just had to watch the wheel until it would like pixelate up and play the video.
Those grainy videos didn't stop all of my friends from using my computer to do other things. Yes. Anyways, a movie that I just purely enjoyed and was fun, nostalgic trip back. Even though it was based around New York City indie rock stuff, and there's obviously tons of other indie rock stuff that we were into or whatever, it was just fun to revisit that time and remember New York from that time in pre 9/11, but how much 9/11 kind of changed their views of things and everything. So
say the name of the movie again.
Meet Me in the Bathroom.
Meet Me in the Bathroom. Okay.
So
I love that. Yeah.
Really fun movie, especially if you're into that scene and some music stuff. All right, so my number 4 is this mockumentary, Brian and Charles, with the actor David Earl. I don't know if you would probably recognize him because he's a very distinct looking person. He played the weird guy with glasses in Derek. I don't know if you ever watched his show Derek, but he's also in Afterlife as well, Gervais's newer.
I think I know who you're talking about. I watched Derek, so I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so he's kind of the main character, and it's a very Taika Waititi mockumentary-esque thing. I had some What We Do in the Shadows moments to it, but just kind of this overarching, sweet, funny. He's kind of a loner inventor that lives in the middle of England somewhere, and suffers from loneliness and depression. But it's more he masks it with inventing things, right? And his whole thing is whatever the idea, he's just gonna do it and see if it works. So he invents everything. He does all sorts of things. He's got a little egg belt holder and all of these silly inventions that no one would actually really use, but are still funny to see him create. And Charles is a robot that he decides to create a friend, and
of course, as one would,
of course. Yeah. And Charles' body is made out of a washing machine, and he has these huge oversized shirts that he wears and puts him, and he's got this weird looking mask that with the eyes cut out, it looks almost like the Terminator, but he's there's an actor inside there. You could tell the bottom half of the body is running around or whatever, and then you have the washing machine top, and it's just this funny, beautiful, charming little movie about him discovering friendship, discovering love, but also like himself and just like having somebody around to talk to, even though it's a robot. But it's like you would love it. It's weirdly charming and funny and strange and just a lot of fun. I had a really good time with that one. So
that's awesome. That sounds very charming. The second you were like, and he makes a robot, I was like, I want to see this.
But in his scrappy, crappy way, right? Like he's
he's a washing machine with giant t-shirts.
he's hodgepodging this whole thing together. So
I love it.
Highly recommend that one if you all get a chance to see it. I'm sure it'll be out soon. All right, my number 3 is a movie with Colin Farrell called After Yang. This is another movie about a robot.
I've watched the trailer for this.
Oh, you have? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I just barely did. Yeah.
This one became way more intriguing. So, like, we recently did AI and talked about AI.
Yes.
And so this was AI with a robot boy in the family, but much, much more intriguing. Really, really thinking about the human side of the emotions of getting attached to something like this and trying to save him. But it was just like a great introspective movie, has a great tone, and really makes you think. And it's made really cool. It's kind of sci-fi, looks great. Colin Farrell's probably the only person you would recognize, but
the rest of the cast is Asian.
Yeah, Asian cast. But you're living in a world where it's a pretty normal thing to have one of these assistants, and their whole their whole thing was they adopted a child from Asia, and they wanted an Asian robot to help raise it so it would understand its culture, right? Understand her culture and basically be her brother. And then one day he stops working, and they have to kind of figure out how to get him fixed. And there's emotional swings and everything. True emotional swings, unlike AI, where you're like, what? Why? That doesn't make sense. This is like real, like, really effective stuff, but also just introspective and just well done. Honestly, it's worlds better than AI. And maybe that's because it's fresh in my mind.
I mean, that's also... It's a low bar, Adam.
That's true. That's a good point.
It's a low bar.
But a really interesting movie. I recommend, and I'm sure if you've already seen the trailer, then it's gonna be out soon. So, good stuff there. After Yang is my number 3. All right, my number 2. This, I'm kind of a sucker for some of these social justice activist dramas. As am I. This movie is called Jane. Elizabeth Banks and Sigourney Weaver are kind of the main cogs in this wheel, and it's called Jane. There's actually a documentary about this also this year at Sundance called The Janes, and it's basically about this group of 7 or 8 women in Chicago in the 70s who are basically under the table performing abortions for people who can't get them, and they really put you in the world of how hard this is. Abortion's obviously a very touchy subject for a lot of people, and I think something that people probably don't think about a lot when they're saying I hate abortion or right to choose or whatever it is. Nobody wants an abortion, right? That's never like a need for somebody like, oh, I can't wait to get this, of course. And this is a drama, a historical drama, but it also is surprisingly light and funny, and they really put perspectives in it. Elizabeth Banks is amazing. Sigourney Weaver, awesome. So good. I wanted to hang out with her. She was the best. She's a hard ass. She's really good at being a hard ass, as we all know. Ripley.
Yes.
But she's kind of the main Jane. So they're all called Jane. There's not really really a Jane.
It makes me so happy to hear you say that about Sigourney Weaver, because I mean, I'm thinking the last time I saw her was Cabin in the Woods.
Avatar?
Avatar before Cabin in the Woods. I mean, it's been so long.
She's done some things here and there.
I know she did a TV series, I think, but I can't, I'm spacing on the name. But really, you're like, when again, thinking back to a movie that we did like Ice Storm,
Sure.
She's so good.
Oh yeah,
she's so good at just straight drama. So knowing that she has a movie that's
she's just as funny, and really it's more Elizabeth Banks' movie than it is hers. But she's such a good supporting character here, and I just had a lot of fun. I actually watched this with the family, and all of us enjoyed it. It brought up a lot of questions, and we had really good conversations about. That's awesome. The different points of view and everything, but
what did your daughter think of it?
Oh, I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. But she,
really?
she had a ton of questions, and I was happy to answer them. And I truly believe in women's rights and believe in equal everything. And abortion is not an easy choice for anybody. But in the 70s, the doctors were charging an insane amount of money, or a couple $1,000 or whatever, to do this because it was illegal, and
women were dying.
Yeah, and a lot of them were dying because they couldn't. There's a quality of life for both the baby and the mother, right? And you have to think about a lot of it comes down to complications and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was just rich white women getting these abortions, and they really created something that ended up being free. For people of all colors, and it was really I think they ended up performing over 11,000 successful abortions by the time it became legal in some states. So obviously this is probably not for everyone, but as we've talked about,
depending on your politics.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so it may not be for everyone, but like we've said before, if you're the best way to empathize with somebody is to go through those experiences with them, right? And this was a great example of that. I'm sure the documentary, which I didn't get to see, I'm sure it's just as amazing as the movie. But it was fun to see a recreation of the story that I hadn't really been super familiar with. But for an abortion drama, I was like, this is great. This is so good. Not only is it, just helpful and informative, but also just like a great perspective that is important for people to look upon.
Wow.
So,
well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what art is for. Art is really to challenge us and put us in someone else's shoes. Give us the opportunity to dramatize and put us into their position.
See something through their eyes. Yeah.
It's so that we have no choice but to empathize and understand. That's the whole point, right?
Even if you disagree with it. So
even if you disagree, you could disagree and be like, "But that was really tough. What a hard position to be in." So wow,
totally.
Very interesting.
But I'm sure it's been picked up already, and it's
the Janes.
Call Jane.
Jane.
Call Jane.
Call Jane. Okay.
Yeah, and then the documentary is called The Janes.
Got it.
So depends on which medium you prefer, but I recommend it. It was really fascinating and something I wasn't super aware of. My last one. This is by far my number one, by a mile. I can't wait for you to see this movie. The movie is called You Won't Be Alone. This is essentially what I've been telling people. This is my one must-see of the year. It's got Noomi Rapace in it. And it's essentially... Go ahead.
Is this the folk horror film?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pepe Monza was telling me about this.
Interesting.
Did he see Pepe, it? Yeah, he saw it. He didn't see a lot from Sundance, but he saw this one. So Pepe, if you remember, he did. He was our guest for The Game, the episode The Game. But he was telling me a little bit about this. So please, yes, this is on the list. So yes,
it should be on the list. It's right down your alley. The way I've been describing it to people, though, is as it's like if The Witch was directed by Terrence Malick.
That's exactly what he said.
Did he? Oh my God, that's so funny.
Word for word, Palcher. Word for word.
Wow, that's
Pepe
so funny.
said.
Well, that's totally what I got because I love the folklore of the witch, and that's for some reason in horror works really well because it's just kind of like you can go places. And Robert Eggers is the one who really took it there first. But for the most part, like it's always like kind of a cool unknown of like what they're gonna do, and I'm surprised they actually don't do this more with like those historical monsters or whatever it is. But obviously people were burned at the stake, in 19th century for being witches and all this stuff. So there is some human elements to this, but the magical elements to this are amazing and what make this special because essentially the witch puts a spell on a baby and that baby becomes kind of her I forgot what they call it in the movie, but kind of like she follows the baby.
A familiar?
Familiar, that's it. Thank you. And
I know a little bit.
it has the ability to kind of transfer through different bodies and worlds and times and all this stuff, and not like it's time traveling or anything, but it's just like they basically have to kill something to become it, and so there's a whole ritual behind it, and the way that they tell it and you keep going through these different perspectives was so fascinating and amazing to me. And whether it's a mute girl or it's a man or it's there's a variety of things. Noomi Rapace is one of them as well. Who is the girl with the dragon tattoo, for those who don't know her. Right. She's in a variety of other things. I don't want to spoil too much because I want everyone to see this movie, but by far, amazing. I was enthralled the whole time. I loved how it kept going and kept going. And then the Terrence Malick part of it is really because the spell was put on the baby, it's basically mute through the whole thing. So we're getting the thin red line thought exercises of the person reflecting on this life. And so that part of it, and then just how it was shot, how amazing it looks.
So it's talking to our character that whole time. Well, and you bring up a really interesting point, which is that, I mean, if you think about the idea that the concept of witchcraft as we know it in a Western society that's all based upon fear. That's all based upon superstition. Yeah, sure, there was Wiccan, and there's, satanic beliefs, and there are these other things that exist outside of this, like, standard Christian Catholicism ideology. Mm-hmm. But the one that we know in popular culture is only built out of fear and superstition. So what makes that great is that it's this blank slate. It's this tabula rasa that you can throw anything into, right? You can, any kind of folk horror. I don't care if you're talking about The Witch. I don't care if you're talking about Hereditary. I don't care if you're talking about The Ritual, these sort of almost like H.P. Lovecraftian like monsters that live in the woods.
Practical magic. The Wizard of Oz.
Sure, why not? But
the Wizard of Oz?
This stuff, yes, completely The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of fucking Oz. Any of that, you can be like, here's actually how the witch functions, right? And you can make all that shit up, the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
And you can make that stuff seem old as hell.
Yep.
Just because you're like, this is what they were talking about. When really what they were talking about was nonsense. What they were talking about was, I don't know, at best, a couple of schizophrenic kids that they were like, oh, see, they're all speaking in tongues. And it's like, no, they weren't. This is mass hysteria. But it's so, you look at those old woodcuts and this sort of, like, it just feels like it has so much weight to it that when you apply any of these stories into it, which are completely fictional, you go, that's what they were talking about. So when you see, like, the naked lady put the baby's guts all over her and start floating up on a branch in Dave Eggers' movie.
Yeah.
Or Dave Eggers is the author.
Robert Eggers is the director.
When you see that, you go, that's what the old, woodcuts were about. That's what the old daguerreotypes were about.
Yeah. This one's directed by Goran Stolevsky. He wrote and directed this movie, and it's, Eggers kind of put the witch thing on the map a bit, and this is just an evolution of that. It's not nearly as fucked up horror as The Witch is. It's way more thoughtful and insightful, and if you like that kind of stuff, I highly recommend this movie. I really, really enjoyed it and thought it was original and unique. I'd say original, even though we're comparing it to The Witch, but like it's the kind of movie I want to like see at Sundance, and it was. I can't say enough about it.
Well, don't you think that in its own way, those horror tropes, what makes those horror tropes so fantastically useful is that they have a formula.
They can play off the history, right? They can play off the history of a witch.
They can play off the history. They have a formula, and because the formula is so universal, you can immediately subvert it without having to give a lot of exposition.
Yep.
I would say that for possession movies. I would say that for haunted house movies.
Ghost movies.
Ghost movies. Slasher movies. Any kind of the small town with a big secret.
Sure.
We know them because they are such well-worn territories that to take that and subvert it and turn it into an art film. I mean, that's what A Ghost Story did.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. Yep,
A Ghost Story did that, and it worked beautifully because it just took that concept and it's like a Ghost Story.
It was a new spin on that, right? It was a new take on it.
And it's not necessarily scary. I mean, there's a couple of like very haunting scenes, but not scary.
Yep.
Instead, it took it and made it into an art film. So I love that.
It was amazing. Again, I can't say enough about it. It was a good festival this year. Tons of other good stuff. So check it out. Do your research and see kind of the best films. Those are my top 5, though. So appreciate everyone listening to me babble on about my
No, it's amazing, dude.
my
I love it every year because I'm like, and then here's what happens, everybody, is that 4 months from now, I'm going to be like,
Yeah.
have you seen Scooby-Doo? And you're going to be like, yeah, I fucking talked about it on the show. And I'm going to think I'm the one that struck oil. And I'm like, well, I saw it, and because it just came on like a on-demand thing. And you're like, no, I saw it at Sundance, you dummy. And I talked about it. I talked about it, and you said you were excited for it, and then you forgot because you have the memory of an ant, which is also true.
Yes, it is. Appreciate everyone listening. Please like and subscribe if you want to follow us and like what you see/hear. We're in all the spaces and places. Until next year's Sundance, appreciate everyone listening. Follow us for the festivals, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, you guys.